In the scorching heart of the 11th century, the Holy Land trembled under a new storm. For centuries, Christian pilgrims had journeyed along the dusty roads to Jerusalem, where earlier Muslim rulers, particularly the Fatimids, had generally permitted safe passage to the sacred sites, allowing access to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and other holy places with relative freedom. Pilgrims returned with tales of devotion fulfilled, and the pilgrimage routes remained viable arteries of faith. But then came the Seljuk Turks, fierce nomadic warriors from the vast steppes of Central Asia, who had converted to Islam and surged westward with unstoppable momentum. Under leaders like Tughril Beg and later his nephew Alp Arslan, the Seljuks conquered vast territories across Persia, Iraq, and Mesopotamia, forging a mighty empire that stretched from the borders of India to the edges of the Byzantine world. Their horse archers, swift and deadly, brought a whirlwind of steel and unyielding faith that shattered the old order. The turning point erupted on August 26, 1071, at the Battle of Manzikert, near the eastern frontiers of Anatolia. Byzantine Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes led a large army to confront the Seljuk forces under Sultan Alp Arslan, whose name meant heroic lion. The Byzantines, numbering perhaps 40,000 to 60,000 including mercenaries, faced a Seljuk host renowned for its mobility and archery. As the battle unfolded on the arid plains, Romanos attempted to lure the Turks into a trap, but treachery among his own ranks, alleged desertions and betrayals, fractured the imperial lines. Alp Arslan's cavalry feigned retreats, drawing the Byzantines into disorganized pursuit, then unleashed devastating volleys of arrows that rained down like thunder. The Byzantine heavy infantry and knights were cut to pieces. Romanos himself was captured after fierce hand-to-hand fighting. The emperor was brought before Alp Arslan, who treated him with surprising honor before releasing him for ransom. Yet the damage was catastrophic. Manzikert shattered Byzantine military power in the east, opening the floodgates to Anatolia. Turkmen tribes poured in, establishing emirates and beginning the gradual Turkification of the region as vast swathes of land, eventually tens of thousands of square kilometers, fell under Turkish control by the 1080s. Byzantine lands burned as Seljuk warlords carved out territories, choking ancient trade routes and transforming pilgrim paths into gauntlets of ambush and slaughter. Villages along the routes to Jerusalem began exacting heavy tolls. While bands of raiders preyed on travelers, pilgrims faced kidnapping, torture, enslavement, or worse. Many were robbed, beaten, or sold into slavery, and reports of desecrated churches and harassed Christians flooded back to the west. The once tolerable journey became perilous, with only large, well-armed groups daring the route, and even they suffered heavy losses. Emperor Alexius I Comnenus, ascending the throne in Constantinople amid chaos, watched helplessly as his empire's heartland crumbled. Desperate, he sent urgent pleas to the West, appealing to Pope Urban II and the kings of Europe for military aid against the infidel horde that threatened to overrun the last Christian bulwark in the East. Word of the crisis raced westward like lightning. In Europe, knights honed in endless feudal wars chafed under rigid bonds, while popes dreamed of unifying a fractured Christendom under the Church's banner. The stage was set for an explosion. On November 27, 1095, at the Council of Clermont in France, Pope Urban II ascended a platform before a vast assembly of clergy, nobles, and common folk. His voice thundered across the open fields as he recounted tales of Muslim atrocities. Pilgrims tortured, churches turned into mosques, altars defiled, and Christians subjected to unspeakable cruelties including mutilation and rape. He exhorted the Franks, renowned for their valor, to cease their private wars and turn their swords against the enemies of Christ. Deus vult, God wills it, he proclaimed, promising remission of sins and eternal salvation to all who took up the cross and marched to liberate the Holy Sepulchre. The crowd erupted in a frenzy, tearing cloth to sew red crosses onto their garments. Knights and peasants alike swore holy oaths, their cries echoing into the winter sky. The call spread like wildfire through the kingdoms of France, Germany, and Italy. Lords mortgaged estates to fund their expeditions, peasants abandoned fields and families, and even women, children, and the poor swelled the ranks. Charismatic preachers like Peter the Hermit, a ragged ascetic from Amiens, ignited the masses with fiery sermons, leading throngs in the so-called People's Crusade of 1096. Tens of thousands who marched eastward in disorganized zeal before the main armies. This was no ordinary campaign. It was a divine mandate, a thunderous clash of civilizations where faith, glory, and the lure of plunder intertwined in a storm of destiny. The Seljuk threat had not only endangered the Byzantine Empire, but had lit the fuse for the greatest holy war the world had ever seen. Armies mustered across Europe, banners snapping in the wind as the First Crusade prepared to hurl itself eastward in unrelenting fury. Yet beneath the religious fervor lay deeper currents of power and opportunity. The Seljuks, though formidable, had fractured the Islamic world into rival factions, weakening unified resistance and creating vulnerabilities the Christian West eagerly exploited. As crusaders trained, provisioned, and sharpened blades to razor edges, the air crackled with anticipation. Horses stamped restlessly, armor gleamed, and the promise of paradise for the fallen fueled an unstoppable momentum. The holy wars had begun, and the medieval world would never be the same. The great host set forth in the fateful year of 1096, a colossal army of knights, foot soldiers, pilgrims, and non-combatants stretching for miles across the horizon like a living river of steel and faith. Estimates place the total force, including women, children, clergy, and camp followers, at between 60,000 and 100,000 souls when all contingents are counted, though the core fighting strength comprised perhaps 7,000 to 10,000 mounted knights and 35,000 to 50,000 infantry. Led by legendary princes, Godfrey of Bouillon, the pious Duke of Lower Lorraine, Bohemond of Taranto, the cunning Norman warrior, Raymond IV of Toulouse, the aged and devout Southern Count, and others such as Robert Curthose of Normandy and Robert II of Flanders, they endured hellish marches through hostile territories. The journey began in waves. Some contingents crossed the Alps and marched through Hungary and Bulgaria, while others sailed across the Adriatic. Starvation gnawed relentlessly at their ranks. Disease felled thousands in squalid camps, and Turkish ambushes rained arrows from every ridge and pass. The People's Crusade, an earlier disorganized wave led by the charismatic preacher Peter the Hermit, had already met disaster. Tens of thousands slaughtered or enslaved near Civito in Anatolia after rampaging through Byzantine lands and massacring Jewish communities in the Rhineland. Yet the main princely armies pressed on, their banners fluttering defiantly as they converged on Constantinople by early 1097, swearing oaths to Emperor Alexius I before continuing eastward. The first major test came at the walls of Nicaea in May 1097, the Seljuk capital in Anatolia. Godfrey of Bouillon arrived first, followed by Bohemond, Tancred, Raymond, and the rest, encircling the formidable city with its towering walls, hundreds of battlements, and a vast lake protecting one flank. Crusader engineers constructed battering rams, mobile sheds for sappers called sows, and cats, towering siege engines, and stone-throwing petraria that hurled boulders day and night. Byzantine naval support blockaded the lake, cutting off resupply, while the Crusaders launched ferocious assaults. Kilij Arslan, the Seljuk Sultan, was absent campaigning elsewhere, leaving the garrison to withstand weeks of brutal combat, arrows whistling through the air, siege towers groaning forward under fire, and hand-to-hand fighting atop the ramparts. By mid-June, after a month of unrelenting pressure, the city surrendered on June 19th, but not to the Crusaders. Byzantine forces under Manuel Butumitz negotiated a secret capitulation, denying the Westerners the plunder they craved and sowing early seeds of distrust. Victory at Nicaea restored much of western Anatolia to Byzantine control and opened the path deeper into enemy territory. Victory followed victory as the Crusaders pressed on, their armor gleaming under the merciless Anatolian sun. The crucible of legend unfolded at the Siege of Antioch from October 20th, 1097 to June 1098. The massive fortress city, perched on the Orontes River, with walls studded by 400 towers and gates, defied the Crusaders for 8 grueling months. Hunger became apocalyptic. Men ate boiled leather, grass, and, in the direst moments, the flesh of their fallen comrades. Disease ravaged the camps, and morale plummeted until a daring night assault on June 2nd to 3rd changed everything. Bohemond, having bribed an Armenian guard named Firuz, who commanded a tower, led a small force to scale the walls under cover of darkness. They burst into the streets in a whirlwind of sword and fire, opening gates for the main army to pour in. The city fell amid chaos, but triumph turned to peril when a vast relief army under Kerboga of Mosul, tens of thousands strong, arrived days later and besieged the besiegers. Trapped and starving, the Crusaders teetered on collapse until a peasant named Peter Bartholomew claimed visions revealing the Holy Lance, the spear that pierced Christ's side, hidden beneath the Church of St. Peter. Discovered on June 14th, the relic ignited divine fervor. On June 28th, the Crusaders charged out in formation, the lance carried aloft by Raymond of Aguilares, smashing Kerboga's lines in a thunderous clash. The enemy scattered in panic, and Antioch was secured. Blood ran ankle-deep in the alleys as the holy warriors claimed their prize. Though bitter disputes over the city's lordship, Bohemond claiming it for himself, nearly fractured the army. Finally, in the blistering summer of 1099, the Crusader army, now reduced by attrition, desertion, and battle to perhaps 1,200 to 1,500 cavalry and 12,000 foot soldiers, stood before Jerusalem itself on June 7th. The Fatimid garrison, confident behind the city's stout walls and well supplied, mocked the ragged invaders. Barefoot and chanting prayers, the Crusaders circled the city in a penitential march on July 8th, processing to the Mount of Olives, where Peter the Hermit, who had survived earlier disasters, preached once more. Siege engines groaned under the weight of boulders as 3 massive wooden towers rolled forward. Godfrey's positioned at the northern wall. Showers of boiling oil, arrows, and stones rained down, yet on July 13th to 14th, the towers reached the walls. On July 15th, Godfrey's men breached the northern defenses in a ferocious hand-to-hand melee. Ludolf of Tournai was among the first to crest the ramparts, followed by waves of knights. A gate swung open, and the Crusaders poured in like a tidal wave. The defenders fought to the last, but the fury was unstoppable. Muslims, Jews, and even some Eastern Christians perished in the savage sack that followed. By nightfall, Jerusalem belonged to Christendom, its streets echoing with triumphant hymns mingled with the cries of the conquered. With the holy city secured, the Crusaders established the Kingdom of Jerusalem under Godfrey of Bouillon, who refused the title of king, calling himself advocate of the Holy Sepulchre. Alongside other states, Edessa, seized earlier by Baldwin, Antioch, held by Bohemond, and later Tripoli, forming the fragile Christian foothold in the east, known as Outremer. These astonishing victories sent shockwaves across Europe and the Muslim world alike. Knights returned as heroes laden with relics, spices, and tales of divine favor, while Islamic realms reeled from the loss of sacred territories. The First Crusade had succeeded beyond all expectation, carving a bloody path to the heart of the Holy Land through endurance, miracle, and unrelenting combat, and igniting a century of holy conflict that would forever reshape empires and civilizations. By the late 12th century, the Crusader states of Outremer had grown complacent after nearly a century of fragile existence. Their borders were guarded by formidable castles like Crac de Chevalier and Belvoir, towering strongholds of stone that dotted the landscape, yet internal feuds among the Frankish lords eroded their strength. Rivalries between the military orders, the Templars and Hospitallers, fueled bitter disputes over land and influence, while weak kings and regencies left the realm divided. The once victorious knights had settled into a life of luxury in the East, intermarrying with local Christians and adopting Eastern customs, their martial edge dulled by prosperity and endless skirmishes. Into this fractured world stepped Saladin, the Kurdish warrior-sultan whose name would become synonymous with Islamic resurgence and chivalrous leadership. Born Yusuf ibn Ayyub around 1137 in Tikrit, Mesopotamia, to a prominent Kurdish military family, he rose through the ranks under the Zengid dynasty, serving first under his uncle Shirkuh, a trusted general of Nur ad-Din. Saladin participated in campaigns that secured Egypt for the Sunni cause. In 1169, after Shirkuh's death, he was appointed vizier of the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt. By 1171, he abolished the Shia Fatimid Caliphate, restoring Sunni orthodoxy and proclaiming allegiance to the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. When Nur ad-Din died in 1174, Saladin seized Damascus, then Aleppo, and other Syrian strongholds through a blend of diplomacy, swift military action, and strategic marriages. By the mid-1180s, he had unified Egypt, Syria, northern Mesopotamia, and parts of Arabia under the Ayyubid banner, forging a powerful Sunni empire capable of confronting the Crusaders as never before. By 1187, Saladin had assembled an unstoppable army numbering around 30,000 men, including disciplined Mamluk cavalry, Arab infantry, and Turkish archers, all united under his green banner of jihad. Swearing to reclaim Jerusalem for Allah and avenge the losses of the First Crusade, his forces moved like a desert storm across the Levant, sweeping aside isolated garrisons and rallying diverse Muslim factions, Kurds, Arabs, Turks, and Bedouins into a cohesive war machine. The decisive blow fell at the Battle of Hattin on July 4th, 1187, in the scorched hills west of the Sea of Galilee. Saladin masterfully lured the Crusader army, led by King Guy of Lusignan, into a waterless trap. The Franks, numbering perhaps 20,000, including hundreds of elite Templars and Hospitallers, marched from their camp at Sepphoris to relieve the besieged castle of Tiberias, where Guy's wife Esheva was trapped. Harassed relentlessly by Saladin's light cavalry, who set fires to the dry grass and blocked wells, the Crusaders suffered under blazing heat and thirst. As they reached the horns of Hattin, two volcanic hills offering meager shelter, Saladin's forces encircled them completely. The Crusader knights charged in thundering masses of heavy cavalry, but Saladin's archers unleashed volleys that darkened the sky, felling horses by the thousands. Infantry baked until they became desperate shadows, their armor turning into ovens. The true cross, the kingdom's holiest relic carried into battle, was captured, shattering morale. King Guy was taken prisoner along with most of the nobility. Saladin showed mercy to some high-born captives, offering Guy water from his own cup, but his wrath fell total on the military orders. Hundreds of Templars and Hospitallers were executed on the spot for their unyielding zeal. The entire Crusader field army was annihilated in one of the most crushing defeats in medieval history, leaving the Kingdom of Jerusalem defenseless. Jerusalem fell 3 months later after a swift and determined siege. Saladin's army, fresh from victories at Acre, Ascalon, and other coastal towns, arrived before the Holy City on September 20th, 1187. The defenders, led by Balian of Ibelin and numbering only a few thousand, including knights and armed citizens, faced an overwhelming force. Saladin positioned his siege engines, catapults, mangonels, and trebuchets around the walls, hammering them day and night with boulders and incendiary projectiles, while sappers tunneled beneath the gates and towers. Arrows rained continuously, and assaults battered the ramparts. After initial positioning near the Damascus Gate proved difficult due to glare and strong defenses, Saladin shifted his camp to the Mount of Olives for better angles. breaches were mined and stormed, but the defenders sallied out fiercely, holding the line for nearly 2 weeks despite heavy casualties among the besiegers. On October 2nd, with no relief forthcoming and the walls crumbling, Balian negotiated surrender. Saladin's chivalry contrasted sharply with the massacre of 1099. He allowed Christian residents safe passage in exchange for ransom, permitted many to leave with their possessions, and forbade wholesale slaughter. Mosques were restored, including the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa, which had been converted into churches, and holy sites reopened to pilgrims of all faiths. The news of Jerusalem's fall shattered Europe, sending shockwaves through courts and cathedrals. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was reduced to a few coastal strongholds like Tyre, while the Muslim world erupted in celebration, hailing Saladin as Al-Malik al-Nasir Salah ad-Din, the victorious Sultan, the sword of Islam that had reclaimed the sacred heartland after nearly 9 decades. His conquests did not end with Jerusalem. In the months following, Saladin swept through the remaining Crusader fortresses and towns with relentless campaigns. His cavalry thundered across the plains, capturing Beirut, Sidon, and much of the interior while besieging, but failing to take, Tyre, a key naval base. He pressed northward, securing key positions and consolidating Ayyubid control over the Levant. Yet even in triumph, Saladin remained a man of honor, negotiating truces with besieged garrisons, sparing lives when surrender came, and treating captives with a generosity that earned him admiration even among his enemies. He distributed spoils fairly among his troops and showed mercy to the defeated, qualities that bolstered his legend. As winter approached and his army rested, Saladin prepared for the inevitable Christian counterstrike, knowing the fall of Jerusalem would ignite a massive response from the west. The stage was now set for the arrival of Europe's greatest warrior kings, Richard the Lionheart, Philip Augustus, and Frederick Barbarossa, and the Holy Land would once again become a battlefield where legends were forged in fire and steel, with Saladin standing as the formidable guardian of the Crescent. In the fateful year of 1189, 3 of Europe's mightiest monarchs answered the thunderous call to arms following the fall of Jerusalem. Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, the grizzled veteran of 68 summers, assembled the largest contingent, perhaps 20,000 men, including 3,000 knights, marching overland through the Balkans and into Anatolia. King Philip II Augustus of France, shrewd and calculating, and England's Richard I, known to history as Richard the Lionheart, tall, powerfully built, red-haired, and renowned for his martial prowess, gathered fleets that darkened the Mediterranean. Barbarossa's expedition met tragedy early. On June 10, 1190, while crossing the swollen Selef River in Cilicia, the emperor's horse stumbled in the current, throwing the armored ruler into the water. Weighted by mail, he drowned before his men could reach him, and much of his army disintegrated in grief and disorder, with only a remnant limping on under his son Frederick of Swabia. Yet Richard and Philip pressed forward by sea, their ships laden with knights, horses, siege engineers, and supplies. Their primary target became the vital port of Acre, the last major Crusader stronghold in the Levant, which had been under relentless siege by Saladin since August 1189. The Third Crusade had begun, a saga of personal rivalries between kings, epic clashes of arms, unbreakable wills, and the clash of 2 legendary commanders who would define an era. The Siege of Acre, which had already dragged on for nearly 2 years by the time the Western kings arrived, became a nightmare of unrelenting carnage. Saladin's forces encircled the besieging Crusaders from the outside, creating a double siege of extraordinary brutality. The original Crusader army, led by Guy of Lusignan and reinforced by contingents from every corner of Christendom, had encamped before Acre's massive double walls and towering siege towers, catapults, and trebuchets, nicknamed the Evil Neighbor and God's Stone Thrower, hurled boulders and pots of flaming Greek fire day and night, while Saladin's relief forces hammered the Christian lines from the rear with arrows, charges, and incendiaries. Disease, dysentery, scurvy, and plague ravaged both sides. Corpses piled in heaps, and the stench hung over the camp like a pall. Richard arrived in June 1191 like a thunderbolt, his lion-emblazoned banners snapping in the wind. Suffering from scurvy himself, he was carried ashore on a litter, yet rose to lead ferocious charges that shattered Turkish lines again and again. His arrival, followed shortly by Philip's, tipped the balance. The kings coordinated massive assaults. Richard's siege engines battered the walls, while his crossbowmen raked the ramparts. On July 12, 1191, after months of starvation, bombardment, and hand-to-hand fighting in the breaches, the garrison surrendered. The streets of Acre ran red as Richard ordered the execution of nearly 2,700 Muslim prisoners, women and children among them, when Saladin delayed or renegotiated ransom payments. Philip, weakened by illness and frustrated by Richard's dominance, soon departed for France, leaving the Lionheart to face Saladin alone in a duel of titans that would echo through the centuries. Marching south along the coast in August 1191, with an army of perhaps 15,000 men, Richard maintained strict discipline, marching in tight formation with infantry shielding the flanks and baggage train. Saladin, recognizing the danger, launched relentless ambushes and harassing attacks, hoping to wear down the Crusaders in the heat. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Arsuf on September 7, 1191. As Richard's column advanced through thick orchards toward the coastal road near Arsuf, Saladin's elite Mamluk and Turkish cavalry, thousands strong, unleashed wave after wave of arrow storms that darkened the sky and felled men and horses. The Crusader infantry, suffering terribly, began to waver, but Richard held them in iron formation, refusing to break ranks prematurely. When the pressure became unbearable and gaps appeared, he unleashed a devastating countercharge. The Lionheart, sword in hand, led the knights in a thunderous massed assault that smashed into Saladin's horsemen like a steel avalanche. Lances leveled, they carved through the Muslim lines, horses reared and fell, banners toppled, and thousands of Saladin's finest warriors perished in the melee. The rout was complete. Saladin's army fled in disorder, leaving the field strewn with dead and wounded. Richard recaptured Jaffa soon after and twice pushed inland toward Jerusalem, reaching within 12 miles of the Holy City's walls in December 1191 and again in the summer of 1192. Each time, however, extended supply lines, winter storms, and the exhaustion of his troops forced bitter retreats. Saladin's scorched earth tactics, destroying wells and crops, ensured the Crusaders could not sustain a siege. In the end, diplomacy triumphed where steel could not. By September 1192, both sides were weary. Richard plagued by illness and news of troubles in England, Saladin strained by the endless campaign and internal pressures. Negotiations produced the Treaty of Jaffa on September 2, 1192. Saladin retained Jerusalem and most of the interior, but the Crusaders kept a coastal strip from Tyre to Jaffa, including Acre. Christian pilgrims were granted free and safe access to Jerusalem and the holy sites, and coastal trade resumed under truce. Throughout the negotiations and even during Richard's severe bout of malaria, the two warriors showed mutual respect. Saladin sent fresh fruit, snow to cool his rival's fever, and physicians to attend him, while Richard acknowledged Saladin's honor in letters and gestures. Though enemies on the field, they regarded each other as equals worthy of chivalric admiration. Richard departed the Holy Land in October 1192, sailing first to Cyprus, which he had conquered en route, and then toward Europe, only to be shipwrecked, captured by his enemy Leopold of Austria, and held for ransom. His exploits during the Third Crusade, victories at Acre and Arsuf, personal bravery, and the preservation of the coastal enclaves made him an immortal legend across Christendom. Richard's departure left the Crusader states clinging precariously to the coast, reduced yet enduring. The Third Crusade had failed to retake Jerusalem, but it had decisively checked Saladin's momentum, halted the complete collapse of Outremer, and restored a viable Christian presence in the Holy Land for another century, as Richard sailed home to face new wars, dynastic intrigue, and eventual death from a crossbow wound in 1199. The Holy Wars entered a new, desperate phase, one marked by diminishing returns, shifting alliances, and the slow erosion of the crusading ideal amid the harsh realities of endless conflict. The Fourth Crusade of 1202 to 1204 marked the catastrophic turning point where the crusading ideal began to devour itself. Launched with papal blessing by Pope Innocent III to strike at Egypt, the economic heart of the Ayyubid realm, the expedition quickly unraveled into venality and betrayal. The Crusaders, mostly French and German knights under leaders like Boniface of Montferrat and Baldwin of Flanders, lacked sufficient funds to pay the Venetian Republic for the massive fleet and transports they had contracted. Venice, under the aged but ruthless Doge Enrico Dandolo, who was blind yet commanding, seized the opportunity. When the Crusaders defaulted, the Venetians diverted the army first to attack the Christian port of Zara on the Dalmatian coast in 1202, an act so scandalous that Innocent III excommunicated the participants, then, in a masterstroke of opportunism, to Constantinople itself. Alexios IV Angelus, a Byzantine prince in exile, had promised vast riches, military aid, and the reunion of the Eastern and Western churches if the Crusaders restored him to the throne. In July 1203, the fleet breached the Golden Horn, stormed the seawalls, and deposed the reigning emperor. But Alexios IV could not deliver the promised payments, and tensions exploded. On April 13th to 14th, 1204, the Crusaders launched a second, far more savage assault. Scaling the walls with siege towers and battering the gates, they poured into the streets. What followed was an orgy of looting and destruction that shocked the Christian world. Churches were desecrated, the Hagia Sophia stripped of its gold, silver, and relics, priceless manuscripts burned or scattered, statues melted down, and thousands of citizens raped or murdered. The Byzantine Empire fractured forever, replaced by the Latin Empire under Baldwin I, and splinter states like the Empire of Nicaea and Epirus. No Muslim city was taken. Instead, fellow Christians suffered the wrath originally intended for Saladin's heirs. The Crusade movement had begun to devour itself from within, poisoned by greed, politics, and the corruption of its sacred purpose. Subsequent expeditions fared little better, each revealing the growing exhaustion of the crusading spirit and the rising power of Muslim resurgence. The Fifth Crusade, 1217 to 1221, directed once more at Egypt, achieved an early triumph when a combined force of Hungarians, Austrians, and others under King Andrew II and John of Brienne captured the key Nile port of Damietta in November 1219 after a brutal 18-month siege involving massive siege towers, naval blockades, and relentless bombardment. Yet overreach doomed the campaign. Advancing up the Nile toward Cairo in the summer of 1221, the Crusaders became trapped by rising floodwaters manipulated by the Ayyubid Sultan Al-Kamil, who had opened the sluices. Starvation, disease, and encirclement forced surrender. Damietta was relinquished, and the crusade collapsed in humiliation. A decade later, Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire, excommunicated twice by the papacy for delays, achieved what arms could not through diplomacy. In the Sixth Crusade, 1228 to 1229, Frederick negotiated a treaty with Al-Kamil that returned Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and a corridor to the coast to Christian control for 10 years without a single battle fought. It was a hollow victory. Frederick crowned himself king in Jerusalem amid scorn from both papal loyalists and local barons, who saw the unarmed recovery as a betrayal of crusading zeal. The city would fall again to Al-Kamal's nephew in 1244, ending the brief restoration. The failures mounted with devastating clarity in the mid-13th century. The Seventh Crusade, 1248 to 1254, led personally by France's saintly King Louis IX, targeted Egypt once more in a bid to cripple Ayyubid power. Landing at Damietta in June 1249, Louis recaptured the city easily, then marched south toward Cairo. Disaster struck at Mansoura in February 1250. Robert of Artois' reckless vanguard charge was annihilated by the elite Bahri Mamluks under the future Sultan Baybars, and Louis's main army was trapped, decimated by disease and combat. The king himself was captured while ill. He was ransomed for a staggering 400,000 livres tournois and the return of Damietta. Undeterred, Louis launched the Eighth Crusade in 1270, aiming for Tunis to strike at the Hafsid Caliphate and perhaps open a new front. Disease ravaged the army before any major engagement. Louis succumbed to dysentery on August 25, 1270, dying on a bed of ashes as penance. His brother Charles of Anjou secured a favorable treaty, but the crusade ended in futility. Each campaign drained Europe's resources, men, money, and morale, while Muslim forces regrouped under increasingly formidable leaders. The Mamluks, slave soldiers who had seized power in Egypt after the Ayyubids, crushed the Mongol invaders at Ain Jalut in 1260 under Baybars and Kutus, securing their dominance and turning their relentless gaze westward toward the remaining Frankish strongholds. The end came decisively in 1291 at the fortress city of Acre, the last major Crusader bastion and de facto capital of the diminished Kingdom of Jerusalem. Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil, son of the great Qalawun, assembled a massive army. Estimates range from 100,000 to 200,000 men, including vast siege trains of catapults, trebuchets, and miners, determined to eradicate the Frankish presence once and for all. The siege began on April 5th, 1291. Acre's formidable double walls, sea defenses, and garrison of Templars, Hospitallers, Teutonic Knights, and local levies, perhaps 15,000 to 20,000 defenders, resisted fiercely for 6 weeks. Catapults pounded the ramparts day and night. The great Mamluk trebuchet, victorious, hurled stones that shattered towers, while sappers undermined walls and countermines collapsed tunnels in thunderous explosions. Street fighting erupted as breaches were made. Templars and Hospitallers led savage house-to-house battles, holding barricades with sword, axe, and boiling oil. Reinforcements from Cyprus arrived too late and too few. On May 18th, a final, blood-soaked assault overwhelmed the defenses. Khalil's troops poured through the breaches in waves, overwhelming the exhausted defenders. Thousands perished in the streets. Women and children were enslaved, knights cut down or captured. The Templar fortress at the sea's edge held longest, but even it fell when undermined and stormed. Survivors escaped by sea in chaotic evacuation, many ships overloaded and sinking under the weight of desperate refugees. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was extinguished after nearly 2 centuries of existence. Outremer vanished. Its castles, Montfort, Beaufort, Croix des Chevaliers, were systematically reduced or abandoned, crumbling into the sands as the last Crusaders sailed away forever. The later Crusades had exposed the stark limits of holy war in an age of shifting realities. Political intrigue, economic strain from endless taxation and loans, and alliances warped by dynastic ambition had eroded the movement's original purity. Papal calls met diminishing enthusiasm. Knights preferred local wars or the emerging Reconquista in Iberia. Yet the dream of reclaiming the Holy Land lingered stubbornly in European hearts, fueling smaller expeditions, the perpetual Templar and Hospitaller defense of Rhodes and Malta, and legends that would inspire literature, art, and future generations. The flame of the Crusades guttered out not in glory, but in exhaustion, leaving behind a legacy of shattered empires, enduring fortresses, and a profound, bittersweet memory of faith's encounter with the sword. The Crusades transformed Europe in ways no one could have foreseen, injecting a torrent of Eastern influences into a continent long isolated by geography and feudal fragmentation. Returning knights and merchants carried back not only relics and plunder, but entire systems of knowledge. The Hindu-Arabic numerals that replaced cumbersome Roman ones, revolutionizing commerce and mathematics. Advanced medical texts from Avicenna and Al-Razi that introduced surgical techniques, pharmacology, and the concept of hospitals, and the preserved works of Aristotle, Plato, and other Greek philosophers, filtered through Arabic commentaries and soon fueling the intellectual awakening of the 12th century Renaissance. Spices, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, once rare luxuries became staples of noble kitchens, while luxurious silks, damask, and cotton fabrics transformed European dress and interior decoration. Trade exploded along new maritime routes as Italian city-states like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa grew fabulously wealthy from monopolizing Eastern commerce. Venetian galleys dominated the Mediterranean, their arsenals churning out ships, and their merchants establishing fondacos, trading posts, in Muslim ports. Genoa's bankers financed kings and popes alike. This economic surge laid crucial foundations for the later Renaissance, shifting power from inland feudal lords to coastal urban elites and fostering a merchant class that prized innovation over tradition. Politically and socially, the Crusades reshaped the medieval order. To fund these vast expeditions, kings imposed special taxes, the Saladin tithe in England, for instance, and compelled nobles to mortgage lands or sell privileges, weakening the feudal hierarchy. Centralized monarchies strengthened as rulers like Philip Augustus of France and Henry II of England used crusading revenues and papal support to consolidate authority over fractious barons. The military orders, the Knights Templar, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights, emerged as powerful transnational institutions. The Templars, in particular, pioneered modern banking. Pilgrims deposited funds in Paris or London and withdrew them in Jerusalem with coded letters of credit, creating an early international financial network that survived even after the order's suppression in 1312. Europe emerged more connected through improved roads, ports, and postal systems developed for crusading logistics. More curious, as returning travelers brought maps, astronomical instruments, and tales of distant lands. And ultimately more powerful, its horizons expanded and its appetite for exploration whetted for the age of discovery that would follow centuries later. In the Islamic world, the Crusades forged a new and enduring unity amid the shock of foreign invasion. Before the First Crusade, the region had been fragmented by rival caliphates, sultanates, and tribal loyalties. The Fatimids in Egypt, the Seljuks in Syria and Anatolia, petty Atabegs in between. The Frankish conquests galvanized resistance, culminating in the rise of leaders like Nur ad-Din and especially Saladin, whose victories at Hattin and the recapture of Jerusalem in 1187 became rallying cries for jihad. This ideology of defensive holy war strengthened Muslim identity across Syria, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, binding disparate ethnic groups, Arabs, Kurds, Turks, under a shared purpose. The Mamluk sultans who succeeded the Ayyubids built on this momentum, repelling both Crusaders and Mongol invaders, and establishing a military elite that would dominate the region for centuries. Trade routes, disrupted during the height of conflict, reopened under more stable Ayyubid and Mamluk rule, enriching cities like Damascus, Cairo, and Aleppo. Cultural exchanges flowed in both directions. Crusader-concentric castles with rounded towers and machicolations influenced Islamic military architecture, seen in later Mamluk fortifications, while Eastern learning, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, continued to flow westward through Sicily, Spain, and the Crusader states themselves, yet deep scars remained. the memory of Jerusalem's brutal fall in 1099, the massacres of Muslim and Jewish inhabitants, and the sack of Constantinople in 1204 hardened divisions, embedding a lasting suspicion of Western intentions that would echo in Ottoman European conflicts and beyond. The legacy of the Crusades endures profoundly in language, culture, and collective memory. The very word crusade has transcended its medieval origins to signify any fervent, large-scale campaign for a cause, political, social, or moral, whether invoked positively or pejoratively. In art and literature, the era inspired epic romances like the Chanson de Roland. Though predating the Crusades, it was reshaped by crusading fervor. The tales of Godfrey of Bouillon and later works from Tasso's Jerusalem Liberata to modern novels and films. Modern leaders and movements have invoked the Crusades as inspiration or warning. Some as a model of resolute defense of faith and civilization, others as a cautionary tale of religious fanaticism and imperial overreach. The wars accelerated the clash and fusion of civilizations, proving that faith combined with ambition could move mountains, topple empires, and redraw the map of the world. They deepened the rift between Latin West and Orthodox East, hastened the decline of Byzantium, and set the stage for the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453. From the thunder of Seljuk horses charging at Manzikert to the final desperate defense of Acre in 1291, these holy wars remain the most dramatic and consequential chapter in medieval history, a saga of extraordinary courage, ruthless betrayal, fleeting glory, and the unbreakable, often tragic human spirit that continues to stir the soul more than 9 centuries later. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this and would like to see more, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Make sure to hit the bell so you are notified when a new video is dropped. Until next time, uncover the truth and question the past.